I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet, and we'd like to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. Sensory approaches can be described as a range of therapeutic strategies that involve the senses: sight, sound, taste, smell, touch and movement. They've been shown to provide relief from distress by supporting a person's ability to self-regulate emotions in more adaptive and effective ways. So we have Michelle Taylor and John Kelly presenting for you this morning. Michelle's an occupational therapist. Michelle has experience in both the alcohol and drug and mental health field. She's worked in mental health as a dual diagnosis coordinator in the past, and in two different projects with Insight over the last few years, involved supporting workers across the state to address problems associated with methamphetamine use. And the second project was delivering workshops on family inclusive practice. She's got a particular interest in and is well practiced in using sensory approaches. John Kelly is a senior psychologist in our service with lots of experience in the alcohol and drug field, and John has recently started incorporating sensory approaches into A&D practice.
Thank you, Rod, and thank you very much for the chance to come and speak about this today. I guess, yes, personally and professionally I've had quite a bit of experience in this area. It's exciting for me to be able to share, though, today, rather than my own experiences, I wanted to share some stories from other workers in AOD and how they've been using this approach. So we're going to hear from a service in New Zealand and how they're using it, and we're going to hear from a service right here in the building, the youth and the allied health team, and we've got John Kelly to talk about that today. So as far as the hour, or a bit less than an hour, I want to start by just briefly giving you a little overview of sensory, just small, but I'm aware that some people won't know much about it, perhaps. And then I'm going to share with you the stories from these other services. And I've posed to them the same questions, so it's a little bit like an interview format that we've got for today. So, in the spirit of the title, I'll just invite you to react to that, I guess. Maybe become aware of how you feel looking at that picture of Elvis there. Now, if I'm thinking of myself, well, the fact that he's smiling, that makes me feel rather good. And he's looking quite gentle, cuddling those teddy bears. So I get these nice feelings. I kind of want to smile back at the image there. If I bring a sort of a sensory preferences lens to that, I happen to quite like Elvis. So when I see that, and if I were to hear that song, that's the title of today, then I would probably feel rather good. And in fact, I use that song to energise myself and to keep focused when I have to write presentations like this one. From a historical context, though, you know, some of you might look at this and think, well, you know, maybe I've got pretty good memories of Elvis, maybe I've got no memories of Elvis. Or, you know, someone could bring the lens to this that, you know, whenever they see this, or if they hear a particular Elvis song, it reminds them of that time at that blues festival when, you know, they had a big fight with their partner and it went really badly and they drank a lot. So I guess my point here is that we all have different individual preferences, and from a sensory perspective, we're receiving sensory input all the time. We can't stop it entirely. So if we can start to think about how we are affected by that and potentially how we modulate that, we can perhaps empower ourselves a bit more in this space. So here are some images that I've gathered together from working using sensory approaches, using sensory modulation, and in particular with people with a dual diagnosis. So I guess as you can see, it can look a bit different to some of the work that we might traditionally do. You can see up in that top corner a rocking chair, and if I bring my sensory perspective to that, that's lots of vestibular input, you know, when you're moving, when you're rocking, for example. Down below that, that's a number of things that we've got together for smoking cessation. And smoking's a highly sensory activity, isn't it? You know, if you think about tactile, people are touching something, and because people are wanting to get that nicotine back into their system regularly through the day, they're doing it often. It's also very oral motor as well. Something's going into the mouth and there's lots of breathing. Up in that top corner with the paper bag there, you can see with movement and pressure written on it. That's an example of taking it out into the community or visiting someone in their home and helping them to give them some cues, give them some examples of how you might use pressure or movement. So we've got some wrist weights there, we've got a lollipop because we get lots of pressure going in our mouths, sucking and with our teeth. And there's you know, hand cream and some cue cards there, and a favourite is the bubble wrap up in that corner. So I just put these there to show you how it can look when we're doing sensory exploration. But ultimately though, the place that we want to take this is into people's lives and to help them to embed these ideas so that what might seem a little weird or strange or just a bit of fun, it then gets taken and used in activities that we might find are very important or that we do every day, like our work, being able to function at work, being able to do the tasks that we need to do each day, you know, like cooking, preparing meals, eating, relating to our friends and looking after our children. So there's lots of definitions of, you know, what is a sensory approach. I won't show you the really wordy ones. The ones I wanted to share with you today are quite simple ones that I have used when I talk to clients in particular about what is this. Because it's new, I've been often searching for ways to make that you know, easy enough to understand and make it meaningful. So this is what I say to people, that you can think of it as you're changing the way you feel and the way that you function, but we're using our senses, we're using sensory input to do that, rather than some of the more traditional ways that might be talking or thinking things through, or maybe taking medicine. And of course, underneath that though, there's something going on at that, you know, neurophysiological level. So we're essentially using these sensory inputs, so sensory modalities, sensory motor activities, to alter the internal physiology so that we feel better and we can function better. And it's what we call a bottom-up instead of a top-down process. So what we mean by that is, another way to think of that is body, mind, rather than mind, body. And the reason that this offers us something, I think, especially with people who like to use substances, is that you know, sometimes it's hard to use our mind when we're distressed, or if we've got cognitive problems due to a whole lots of reasons, whether it's trauma or the use of a substance, or someone's in withdrawal. And then there's also preferences. Sometimes, I know myself, I know CBT, I know mindfulness, I love that stuff, but when I'm really tired or really grumpy, I do not want to think. I do not want to use that. So it's another tool. that I can use quite quickly and simply. And as one person aptly put it, I heard him say that I used my body to get my mind back. So that's an interesting way to think of it. So in terms of research, there's been quite a bit now especially over the last decade or so, in mental health, because it's come into the fore really around the world because of the desire for all of our services to look for alternatives to secluding and restraining people when they're highly distressed and agitated. And so sensory modulation, sensory approaches have been offering something in that space, and there's been some more research done in that space. So this one, I just wanted to share this one with you, which is a review of 17 studies. So the good news from this is they did find that it did reduce people's distress, and it was safe and effective. And the recommendation was that it's used alongside the interventions we already use, not in isolation. That it got the best results doing it that way. So that's pretty much come out of mental health. As we know, though, a lot of people entering our mental health services also have substance use. But I guess it's newer in the substance use area. So in my role then as the dual diagnosis coordinator at the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital, which is what I was doing before I came here, and we were in the process of introducing sensory approaches on the wards and in the community, I started thinking about its application for AOD and why it might be very helpful for some people. And I guess with that lens, it occurred to me that when we, consume substances, it's a very sensory experience. So rather than sensory modulation, it's like substance modulation. But they have these things in common, I think, that we're using them to self-regulate, both of these. They're both rapid and they're both quite easy. And they target a lower level of the central nervous system so that we don't have to think. It's like a substance, it can work without you thinking about it. And then we also got thinking too that the functions of sensory modulation, they actually align really well with our classifications of substances. So the three things that we're often trying to do with the sensory approach is to calm, to alert the central nervous system, and to alter or distract, to shift people out of whatever state they're in. And I thought, that's interesting because, people often use substances for those same sorts of end goals too. So that's a nice way that we can help people to make links with this for their use as well. So I'd like to show you then, these are the questions that I asked our two services. What area did they work in? How did they learn about sensory approaches? Why did they decide to start using it? And how did they start using it? I gave them each a checklist, which I'll show you. And then I asked what were the things that people found most helpful. The clients, their families, the workers. And then anything else that they would like to add. And this is the checklist. So I made this checklist up just from my experience, understanding some of the things that have helped, the areas that people have been helped in the past. So you can see there's a lot of different things there, from engagement and therapeutic relationships through to environments and helping people to stay safe, managing withdrawal and cutting down use, managing emotions and moods and symptoms of trauma and psychosis, coping with cravings, managing in a crisis, learning new skills, routines or habits, and as part of traditional sorts of relapse prevention plans and maintenance strategies, and improving their functioning to do the sorts of jobs and tasks they want to do, and supporting relationships. So what I'd like to do now is move on and share with you what has been shared with me. So it's really exciting to be able to share with you the work from Watamata, from the Community Alcohol and Drug Service. And I've worked with, well, I haven't worked with them, we've shared in this space. I've networked with Ellie, who's the nurse educator there, Ellie Richards, and Karen Fraser, who's a physiotherapist, would you believe, the only physio, I'm told, in New Zealand who works in this area. And these guys, so they work in the detox services in New Zealand, and they've got an 11-bed medical detox. They do walk-ins and they do community and home detox also. So I asked, how did they learn about sensory approaches? So for them, it was mandated in 2007 across mental health as part of seclusion and restraint initiatives. And you know, they fell under that banner, being AOD. And Karen, who's the physio, she'd worked in paediatrics and disability, and she'd had exposure to sensory approaches in that area. So some of you might have had that also. It gets used a lot in that area because often babies and children, their brains are still developing, so they can't use a lot of the, you know, higher cognitive sorts of treatments that we traditionally used. So they did this amazing thing. They trained all their staff, 150 of them, in 2011, and that was by their senior OT, Andrea Dempsey. And they did a 2-hour introduction looking at the foundations. They did a 1-day workshop then applying the sensory approaches, and then they had the chance to do some top-ups and some ongoing learning. They decided to use it apart from being mandated because they'd seen it have some good outcomes in their mental health unit. And one of the things that did happen there was they were having a lot of incidents of people being secluded. So they looked to this approach and they created a sensory room amongst other things. And they were eventually able to get rid of their seclusion room on their ward. And as you'll see at the bottom there, Ellie converted her office into a sensory room as well because she thought it was having a really great effect on people that she'd heard about in the mental health ward, so she did that in the AOD space. And they just like it because it's something else to offer people. It's another thing in their toolkit that they can put on the menu for people as a way to feel empowered and to support them in recovery. And they provided this really nice slide that sums up why they think it's helpful. So it enables and empowers people to self-regulate. They use it a lot in preparation. So before someone goes to a group or does their individual talking therapy, they will help them to calm down. They'll use sensory approaches in that way so that they can actually do good work together and the person feels like they can focus and think. And it empowers people to do the things that are important in their day-to-day lives. So this is really interesting. I had a great chat to them and I learnt, I think, quite a lot just listening to how they're using it because they're quite a way down the track. So one of the ways that they use it a lot is in withdrawal, and they put a sensory room on their detox unit. And what a sensory room is allowing their clients is to have that experience, not just a concept and a theoretical idea, but to go in and try things out and feel different and to feel, you know, more safe, or to feel pleasure, feel nurtured, to feel calm. And they did a little bit of research, and they're some of the favourite items that people, you know, that were most popular. The massage chair. I know on the mental health unit they kept blowing out the motor on the massage chair. It was that popular. People really liked things that provided some weight. So weighted blankets and weighted animals, like soft furry toy animals that we put poly pellets into if you don't have the real thing, like pet therapy. Excuse me. And you can see some other things there that were really popular as well. So the bonus was it was giving people skills, and skills not just there and then, but skills that they could take away and think about when they left, to take with them to go home. And they shared a story of a man who used a weighted dog to help him calm down. And that provides lots of deep pressure and proprioceptive input, we call that. And so that helped them to go on and look at other things that provide that same input that could bring him pleasure. So gardening became a big focus of his, because if you think about gardening, you're kneeling, you're digging, lots of heavy work, lots of that kind of input. And then he went on to look at work, you get domestic work. So it had this nice movement for him, helping him look at what sort of input he liked to get in the things that were activities that were important. And with the research that they did with 136 people, and they had 17 items in their sensory room, and they asked people to self-evaluate just using a scale on 1 to 10. And they got some really good results. They found that 94% of people reported an improvement in their mood after using items in the sensory room. So they went from 4.4 to 8.1 in terms of feeling, more calm, up that 10 end. And that's a picture of the sensory room. So you can see the weighted animals in there, and you can also notice that it looks very much just like a regular room, and that's generally how a sensory room would feel, with a range of items there. So they also have another small room that has more items with more of a physical input, like treadmills and the TheraBand and the weights. With their physio there, they were able to offer that too. So these are some other ways that they used it for managing anxiety, both in crisis and for building skills, and trying to find ways to really calm down that nervous system and activate the parasympathetic nervous system. They used it to look at identifying and managing triggers and part of relapse prevention plans. So a lot of this was people becoming aware of the triggers, especially those that were sensory, seeing something, hearing something, smelling something, and then thinking about what they could do in response to that with a sensory kind of lens on that too. They got people to think about that connection to their substance of preference as well. So, methamphetamine versus benzos, what are people looking for there? How are they looking to feel from the substance? And what can we offer then in a sensory sense through activities or modalities to help someone feel really alerted and confident, or maybe to help them feel really, really chilled out? So to get those neurochemicals happening in another way through sensory input rather than through substance input. This next area is really interesting, sort of pain management, both in an emotional sense and a physical sense. They've been using this a lot. And it was interesting, as I spoke to them, someone came into the room when I was on the phone, and they were seeking a frozen orange, because that's one of the modalities that they like to use, that clients really like, because this person had been self-harming and feeling really dysregulated. So they came in to get the frozen orange for this person on the ward. And so one of the things that the example I give there is sometimes we use quite intense sensations for people when they're feeling that way, just as DBT often has a focus like that too. And there's some different examples that they gave, that they often use things that are sour, or they smell strong, or it's crunchy like an apple. And by the same token, they might use things that really calm things down, like weight and other preferences of that person. Breathing, they use it a lot to get people to calm their breathing down. This is really interesting because, breathing is can be a very tricky one for us to master, I think. So if you bring a sensory lens to that, as they're doing, they were using activities to help the person relax their breathing when it's hard to, think it through and just do it on your own. So some examples they use are trying to elongate that out breath, which activates the parasympathetic nervous system and calms things down. So they get people to, say, blow bubbles or maybe blow a small pinwheel, or to breathe in a nice, a favourite scent, for example. And of course they were using exercise too, with Karen's expertise, as a way to help people. It's that very bottom-up approach. They're using it for sleep. And of course this can be a really long haul for our clients. So their focus was to provide things that were really practical and enjoyable and that were very personalised for that person. And of course that can be anything, and I think we do this a lot anyway, but they found just having some of the tools of sensory modulation helped to kind of make it a bit more real, or get to these points a bit faster, get buy-in from clients, if you like. And they also brought that to the notion of foods for sleep and generating serotonin. So, there's lots of activities there that might generate serotonin. So they would use sensory preferences and look at what people really liked to try and tap into their favourites there. Supporting relationships. So they like to involve the people's carers and families. And this is a really powerful area because it helps to develop empathy. So it helped their workers to develop empathy too and understand why that person's always making noise or can't sit still, for example. And it helped their families understand that too. And there's that idea there of using co-regulation, which just means that you're doing an activity together to so that everyone feels better. And that's a nice one, especially with younger people involved as well. And as I mentioned before, they used it to prepare for other interventions. So they do it first, and it might mean their example was someone had used a weighted blanket, use some hand cream, have a drink and rock in the chair to self-regulate before their CBT session. And they also had a sensory group, and this was a 3-week group, and they do a 2-hour group each week for 3 weeks, run in the community by their mental health OTs or in conjunction with their mental health OTs. And you can see there it had these 3 pretty clear steps. That the first session was about educating people, helping them understand, become aware of why would you do this, what's the underlying physiology, and what are your senses. And then the second one will be building skills, experimenting, understanding preferences, and building what we call a bit of a sensory diet. So that's about, establishing a routine into your day-to-day and week-to-week sort of life to make it real and part of how you live. And the third important part was the application into people's recovery plans, their relapse prevention plans, and in managing triggers moving forward. When I showed them this checklist, they said yes, that I put a smiley face there for everything, because they said that yes, it helped with all of those things. And I listed down the bottom the other things that they said it helped with, like breathing, exercise, pain, and with group work. what were the most helpful things? Well, it was useful, practical, it was personalised, and people don't have to wait. That nice notion of instant gratification, which kind of aligns well with people who like to use a substance to get their needs met quickly. And I'll let you read some of the feedback that their clients gave to them. And if there's anything else, there was quite a bit, but I guess one of their key messages was to start with yourself, and they got everyone learning and applying it and feeling its usefulness for themselves in their own life, because we've all got bodies and central nervous systems, so that's how they began. And that notion of awareness being key, and starting to take notice of what triggered people and why they liked their substances with a sensory lens. They said be prepared for not everyone to like it, and because it is quite a different approach. It does represent, I think, some culture change, that idea of nurturing and self-soothing. But at the same time, it's such an important skill that many of our clients mightn't have experienced, that we can offer to them. And as they said, enjoy the surprises. And they've had lots of, great surprises, just as well, I have too. And so I think that's probably a very good segue to go into our next piece. There's Elvis getting some really great proprioceptive and vestibular input there, doing his jailhouse rock. But without further ado, I'd like to invite John Kelly up, who's the team leader here at Biala in the Biala and the Youth Allied Health team with Hothouse. We were going to have Amanda here as well today to chat, but John has stepped in today, which is great of him. Thank you. So if you give us a moment. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
And so the idea of this, I think it's great to be able to hear from someone firsthand who's started using sensory approaches. So we're really grateful to have John here. So John, are you happy to answer that first question and just let people know the sort of work you're doing and the clients that you tend to see, you and Amanda?
Yeah, I suppose just the context of community-based alcohol and drug service. So looking at, I suppose I'm representing kind of two teams. So one is the youth, the Hothouse, so working with a specialised team of social workers and psychology, working with young people under 25 with complex mental health concerns. So that outpatient counselling, sort of therapeutic style interventions, doing family work, individual work, and doing outreach. So to places like Headspace or Open Doors or a few different sort of services like that. And I'm also representing some of the clinicians who work more in the adult context, so the Biala Allied Health Service, but I also know that there's some in the other sort of community areas as well who are introducing some sensory practice as well. So more that standard adult outpatient alcohol and drug treatment.
So you guys, how did you start to hear about sensory approaches and start to learn in this space?
Well, the team learnt it in a few different ways. My interest was sparked in going up to the Royal Brisbane and going to the adolescent unit. And that was the first time I'd ever seen a sensory room. So seeing it applied in a mental health setting and hearing different experiences from people who are staff as well as from young people who are accessing it. So those who loved it and those who found it quite challenging. And then what was kind of interesting was then to see a seclusion room. And seeing and hearing about people's experiences. Not that was used much at all, but hearing and seeing those differences, that's kind of sparked my interest. And I know that I suppose other people, how they've learnt about it was partly through exposure, through you, hearing about sensory approaches and being introduced to it. There's a few other things through trainings. The QC MHL e-learning was another big component for people as well. Yeah. Because
I know you guys all did that learning online, so that prepared you.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So let's go to number 3. I mean, I'm always interested in this, what made you think you'd like to try using it?
Here's a series of responses, I guess, from different people in the team. So they've come up with a few different kind of ones. Why I like doing this is that I believe that we're all a product of our environment. Like, we're all very reactive to stuff that goes on around us, and we feel it. So you can walk into, I can walk into a room and sometimes you go feel a good vibe, or you feel a bad vibe, or you can, I feel like I'm very reactive. So a lot of this just made sense. I think that a lot of the clinicians, including myself, had looked at, why some therapies don't seem to work so well, is that often they're really thought-based and really heavily based on our thinking. And we're really, including myself, are very aware that I know what to do in the situation, but I don't necessarily do it. And sometimes you can be reacting to your moods or to the sensations around you. So it just made sense to introduce, or looking at building a capacity to play around with senses as a different style of intervention. So I think initially for a lot of us was just to play with it, thinking this is a novel idea to play, and then we were surprised that it worked. So it sort of has led on to that sort of level. Yeah, that's how it sort of... So yeah, and like a lot of people, like it's not cognitively based, so you don't have to think about a lot of the interventions. So a lot of the time I think we try to do stuff where we have to think so much, and this is taking away that element, so it's easier to do. People can do it. Especially if they're, I suppose, I'm thinking about younger people who may be going through withdrawal or who are compromised. They can be empowered to do something or take a step to improve things without having to think about it too much.
That's nice. So they can get success quite often, can't they, and easily?
Yeah. And it works well with other interventions, so that mindfulness, or if you're into acceptance, commitment-based therapies, or if you're into more DBT style, it can kind of work well. They parallel each other.
Great. So what about this next question, which is, it'd be good for us to hear how you started to use it. And I know, John, you've got a good example of how you like to start things, bringing a sensory lens, a sensory approach when you see a client.
I think that I'd really like to put out there that we're new to this as well. So as a team and as a floor, as a synophylact component, we're kind of new. So we're still very much, we're not like the New Zealand sort of, they're very much further down the track to where we are. So we're still playing around with a lot of different sort of strategies. And I've got some clinicians who are really into it and some who are just going along for the ride sort of thing. So there's these nice differences, which I kind of like, that you can be flexible with a lot of it. One of the big ones that I kind of am really into is that, and the slide came up earlier about preparing people for treatment or preparing them for their counselling sessions. So one component or a thing that would be pretty much every young person that I would see would be asking them as they walk into the room, do you want the lights on or the lights off? So we get natural light versus fluoro light. And I find about 2/3 say light off. So they want that other sort of, they want natural light. Other people say they want the hardcore fluoro light. And when you start to talk with people about what is your preference, you start to hear different people's experiences. So my favourite way, I think maybe with Michelle talking about it, was like if you go into a 7-Eleven at midnight and that blaring lights, you get in there, you get out quick. I don't feel comfortable and that sort of thing. Versus in another environment with lower level light, you hang around there. And that's what we started to see. So even in the clinical room, we started to see young people who wanted different levels of lighting for their comfort. And you see them soothe and sort of calm and sort of sit into the environment. We've got a range of chairs. So we've got lounges, we've got hard chairs, we've got sort of more standard sort of seating, like kind of what we've got in the room here at the moment. And people get the choice about where they want to sit or how they want to sit, what kind of, things that they're in. So just, I know, these couple of little simple tools that you saw people calm or settle in to the environment to sort of start to work on. And they may change. So one week it may be high level light, the next week it might be low level light. It's constantly flexible. It's not just a standard. So, I mean, that's sort of on that engagement sort of level. Here's a couple of examples where people are using it, sort of strategies when people were distressed. So we sort of found that when somebody could be, highly anxious, or they could be, hurting, or they could be, sort of wanting to avoid, some uncomfortable emotional sort of experiences, having a range of sort of things available for people that they could use to help calm or self-soothe. So we had some items in the room that are sort of like maybe a bit more sharp or spiky, other things that could be squishy or soft or things you could rip if you wanted to, or just things to sort of help stay in the moment, and they could vary. So people had this choice of stuff that they could use just to sort of calm down. I know one clinician's used scents as well, like smells and that sort of thing as well. They'd like to play around with those. I don't know how to do that. I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, you do have to be a little more careful with scents because they are quite evocative, and people can, they can have an instant reaction to those, good or bad. The only thing is though, they're hard to shut down. So like if they're in the environment, it's hard to stop smelling them straight away, whereas an object that's out, you can take that away or bring it out. But they're really, really nice ideas. We often call those, some of those sorts of things you mentioned are fidgets, which you've probably all seen and heard about. But a lot of those sorts of things can just be everyday items, like books or pens or lollies or a drink, things like that, that don't feel too strange, to be reaching out and using or touching. John, I thought maybe we'd go forward to the next slide, if that's okay, because I might just tell people what this is and then you can explain how you guys have used it, if you want to.
Yeah.
So this is the sensory preferences checklist that this was developed to go on that e-learning module, the Queensland Centre for Mental Health Learning. It's there if you want to learn about it and use it. And you can see that down on the left-hand side, you've got the sensory area. So we've got visual, sound, hearing, touching, being touched, smelling, tasting, and movement, pressure. And then we've got these three columns, so people can think about what calms or soothes them in those areas, what alerts them or energises them, and what they really don't like, what they find noxious or disturbing in that last column. And if you go over just to the next slide, on the back it gives some examples to cue people, which can be helpful. So I know that you guys have been using this one, and certainly if you do that QCMHL learning, this is a tool that you could think about using with people. John, was there anything you wanted to say about this one?
This is probably one of those starting tools that we use with a lot of young people, if they're responsive, and that kind of thing, are open to this sort of different approach. But it's a nice, and it's probably one that I think, well, the way I learned to do it was to do it on myself first, where you started to practice around how you deal with, a stressful day. So when you've had a hideous day here at work, what do you do? And starting to look at some of the strategies that you apply. So getting, I suppose in particular, I've sort of worked more with young people about how they can apply actual behaviours or things that they do. And the really awesome thing about it is sometimes the same thing serves different purposes. So you'll see, like a shower. Some people say having a shower is really good. I get home from work or had school or whatever, and I must have a long hot shower to wash the worries away. But then you'll also hear them say, I need to shower to energise. And so you can actually use the same strategy in different ways. And so it's starting to play around with identifying what you can do. And I'm surprised at the creative things that people come up with when they do this, and how different it is to me. So, or like what I would suggest, or completely different sort of strategies. So it's looking at, I suppose, all the senses, looking at what are visual things. So I know some people like calm colours and rooms and that sort of stuff. Other rooms we've set up are really visually chaotic, because other people, like myself, prefer that. So it's playing around with those things, but yeah. Handy little tool.
And the other thing is, as you kind of mentioned there, that at different times of the day, or depending on your mood and what's happening in your life right then, you're not static. So your sensory preferences, they'll alter. So yes, some days you might really want to be around lots of people, and that might be, or you might like the really bright rooms, because that's what you need right then. Then at another time, like the next time a client walks in, they'll go, I don't want to see anyone, I don't want to, listen to anything, I really want to calm down and not have as much of that. So the nice thing about this is it's a big menu, isn't it? And I'm talking with Amanda, one of the things she mentioned was that if they don't have a sensory room, these guys, upstairs, but just talking through the list, people's anxiety levels would drop just by having the conversation. So she was really surprised by that, and that was really, really good to hear. And as you said, John, I think it can be infinite. So it's a really nice message to give our clients that the world has infinite sensory inputs in it, and you will be the one with the greatest knowledge of what helps you and what doesn't, and where you can take that in all sorts of... and I love the daily activity of the shower. You know, that's really clever, thinking about the activities you do every day, because you've got to do them every day. So how do you bring the sensory lens to that, to the way you dress, the way you eat, having showers? Great.
Yep.
So let's go to the next one then, if that's okay. And this was an example of Amanda's. I'm happy to mention this briefly if you like.
Sure.
So it's a shame Amanda can't talk us through this, but that first example was one that Amanda gave of someone who had problems with self-harm and suicidality. And I think to the surprise of them both, they managed to find a strategy that helped this person a lot. And it was a pretty simple one. It was running their hands underwater. And Amanda spoke about how this person, this was their go-to strategy now, and they felt really distressed. So I think that, you know, having worked a bit with people with self-harm, it's interesting, because often people want to feel a lot, or they want to feel nothing, and that's when they're looking to self-harm. So we can bring a sensory perspective there. And you guys have also been, you know, chatting sometimes to carers and family about this, getting them involved too, which sounds like it's been had some nice results, because it's helped people to come together and to feel like there's practical things they can do to support one another. Yeah,
I think involving, what we've noticed is that if you can get family or partners, or sometimes we've done one situation recently with a school getting involved to understand why people needed to do certain things to just cope with the emotion, so to help them self-regulate. I think the important part with some of these as well is that we do more than just that with the self-harming. So this is like one strategy is to help calm and then deal with stuff. It sort of helps contain it. That's kind of what it's sort of doing to allow that higher level functioning sort of to kick into play. So yeah.
Okay, do you want to fast
keep
forward?
going.
And so these, I guess you guys all have a smiley
Lots
face
of smiles.
and there's those other two that we've just talked about at the bottom. The next one, what did you find the best about it, or was particularly helpful?
I think that what we found so far, it's kind of interesting, is that it's easy and it's not resource intensive. So people come up with their own ideas and doing stuff that they use within their day-to-day life. Look, the big thing that we hear from people is that, like, young people have described it made sense. They also said that it works. So as a strategy, it worked to sort of cope with things. And some of them had sort of described things like, when you do this, you don't have to think as much about certain problems, or certain problems naturally resolved, or being in a better position to deal with stuff. So to actually, having to, apply higher thinking or reframing thoughts or doing other strategies. So we heard that sort of stuff. The other interesting sort of piece of feedback I was saying, Michelle, just before, is that after you do this for a while, if you play with people and as they come into the room and set up an environment and that kind of thing, if you forget to do it, they start to tell you to do it. So I had this, like, people started to have ownership or creating and started to, you could see them applying it in other environments. It was quite fascinating to actually kind of get in a bit of trouble because you didn't ask them or set up, check with them about how their environment, would like to be set up.
How did you feel about this one? Are there any, I think there was one particular thing there, the second point.
Point 2 is the only one that I would be highly encouraging people to give this if you're going to take something from here, I would be encouraging checking out the resources that you'll talk about soon, but I think it's similar to like ACT therapies or DBT or other therapies. When you're doing emotional regulation sort of work, about you have to apply it in your own life before you should start applying it with clients. So that whole idea, I think Michelle uses the word, I've never heard it before, the sensory lens and that sort of thing. Very OT. And it's a lovely way of looking at the stuff when you start to think and you start to view the world. So your experience of coming into, I don't know, the Biala building or to another place, and you take the walk as you're walking here next time, and you walk down the street and you notice how you're feeling and you notice certain sensations, and you walk through and you notice what's going on, and the smells, the sounds, the stuff. As you go to the lift and you read the signs, as you do all this sort of stuff, come to your floor, look at the screens and the images, you look at all this stuff and you apply it to yourself. It becomes quite therapeutic and quite useful. So I'd be saying, if you're going to apply any of this sort of stuff, work out what your own preferences are first, so that there's tools, or Michelle or other people can help with that, looking at what you like and what you dislike, applying the checklist, and seeing how you apply it in your own life before we start, sort of playing around with other people, or sort of working with other people in this sort of area. That would be my big take home. Yeah.
I would say yes, ditto. It's hard to unknow it. Once you know it, it's really interesting. You can bring it, of course, into your own life and practice first. So just to finish, another favourite picture of mine, of course. You might really dislike those. So this is just to let you know that there's a lot of different services and applications in the AOD space where people are starting to use it. And it's been quite exciting hearing about some of the work they're doing, at Clarence Street, ADORS, for example. So this is really just to frame that up so that sensory approaches are being used in a range of places. Now, if you want to learn some more, do talk to your occupational therapist if you have an OT. They will really guide you, because they do this in their undergraduate coursework, so they can lead in this area and help you with training and supervision. Do the QCMHL e-learning module. It's free whether you're in Queensland Health or not, and you will learn about the application of a couple of tools, including that one we talked about today, the sensory preferences checklist. If you want to go further with this, think about consulting the statewide group, which I've been a part of, the Mental Health OT Sensory Approaches. Clinical groups, a big mouthful. And we've developed a clinical capability framework over the last 5 years to help services and professionals look at, what professional development and supervision and scope of practice can look like as if you want to progress in this area. Feel free to get in touch with me, and I've also created a video it's free and you can go and have a look at if you're wanting to think about it or even share it with clients, because I was finding it sometimes a little hard to talk about, so it's just another way to show people. That's the clinical capability framework, and this is the research that is going to be happening shortly with Hothouse. Thank you so much. I did have that one, but I'm not sure how we're going with the time.
There were a couple of questions online, but I think you've already answered one of them. That was about QCMHL e-learning, and that's available to NGOs and Queensland Health. You've already mentioned that. The other one was the sensory preference checklist template. Is that generally available online or somewhere?
Yes, so I know it is available through the QCMHL. You can contact me if you would like to get that. Just not sure if it's housed anywhere else. An OT will know how to get hold of it too. And there's lots of different ones, but that's just quite a good one that sums things up. The only other thing I'd say is the people who've contributed to today, I just wanted to thank everyone. The workers in New Zealand who are doing that great work for so freely sharing that information, and their contact details are there too, as well as the guys from Hothouse and Third Floor. Thank you very much. Their contact details are there, so people are happy for others to get in touch if they'd like to hear more and learn more about how they've started using sensory approaches in AOD.